Hi, everyone. I've been looking forward to sharing today's podcast. We record live from Spain, where we're working on a really exciting project that you'll hear more about soon. In the meantime, each of my books, Storytelling with Data and forthcoming Storytelling with Data, Let's Practice, which will be released in October 2019, have an entire chapter focused on the importance of thinking like a designer. What better way to get insight into this mindset than to speak with three fantastic designers from Z1? Z1 is a technology, design, and engineering digital production studio located in the beautiful city of Seville. Tune in to hear us chat about the important role of empathy in design, low-tech wireframes, research, and user feedback for de-risking projects, and the challenge of attachment and how to overcome it. Plus, learn what hiding the dragon can teach us about defining functionality and building products that delight our users. I hope you enjoy today's episode of the Storytelling with Data podcast on thinking like a designer.
Welcome to Storytelling with Data, the podcast where listeners around the world learn to be better storytellers and presenters with best-selling author, speaker, and workshop guru Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic. We'll cover a wide range of topics that will help you effectively show and tell your data stories. So get ready to separate yourself from the mess of 3D exploding pie charts and deliver knockout presentations. And with that, here's Cole.
Hi, this is Cole. Things may sound a little different here today because I am in Seville, Spain. You may hear an air conditioner kick on because it's about 40 degrees outside. For those in Fahrenheit, that's about 104 degrees. But I'm very excited because I am joined today by Hector, Lucia, and Juan from Z1. And we'll talk a little bit more about what Z1 is momentarily, but first off, welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm super curious. This is my first time in Seville. And for those out here who haven't had the opportunity to come to Sevilla before, what makes Seville unique?
Who wants to answer?
Well, I think Sevilla is really interesting because it's a big city, but it's not a really huge city. Mm-hmm. So everything is approachable. You can go everywhere by walk. And I think that is really, that's something really good because you can visit the city in a totally different way.
Yeah, exactly. And by bike or walking. And yeah, it's manageable city to live in. And also it has a nice mix between like modern things but also traditional things, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's a city with a lot of history. I mean, sometimes it's incredible, but our buildings that are hundreds of years and old, and we just pass by them and we don't realize about that. But when the tourists come, their minds blown up.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue, when we start to think about the architecture and the design, right? Our topic today is design. So let's twist this around into how is Seville unique from a design standpoint?
I don't know design specifically, but one thing that I'm pretty sure is that in the south of Spain and also in the south of Europe, there's some sort of creativity around how we are as people and hanging out in the streets and how we are so passionate about the things that we like from life, right? So I think that's something we can apply to design too, and it's something that finally is something we like to do at Z1 or C1 for our American friends. And yeah, I feel it's part of the city in some way. This is a city, but where any person can approach to you and talk in an easy manner. So I think that design has or at least we try to put that in place, that empathy is super important for design. And I feel that the Southern people from Seville is empathic from early days in your life, right? Like we're taught to be like that. So probably that's part of what I think it could be important. Yeah.
Yeah, empathy, which translates to so many different things in designs, right? Thinking about our users, thinking about how they'll interact. Let's back up. And Hector, can you talk a bit about Z1?
Well, yeah, we're a digital product studio. Basically, we're partnering with startup founders or technology companies, and to create products or from 0 to 1. That's or it's after the name, and or to evolve a product that is already exists as an MVP or wherever. And basically, we have a multidisciplinary team from researchers, designers, engineers. And what we try to have as a unique skill as a company is that we try to approach every project as a product with a product vision. We're not an agency, a design agency just designing or a dev shop just coding. It's more like, okay, what do we want to build here? How do we prioritize things? How do we know if this is valuable for the user or not? So at the end, that makes sometimes project to be more complex in some way, but it's our main goal as a company.
So there's so many interesting topics to get into when it comes to design and so many different ways we could tackle this. But I have some really specific questions for you. But maybe before we get there, start broad. And I'm curious, how would you articulate what comprises good design, right? When a design is effective, what does that mean? Said we'd start broad.
For me, I work as a UX designer, so probably I'm influenced by that. But for me, design needs to be useful, needs to be clear about how the information is displayed. And of course, there is aesthetical approach or condition about the design. For me, it needs to be useful more than anything.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't perceive that, right? In a product that probably is super simple and that, but it's well designed because we perceive that it's simple to use and easy to use, right? So it sounds a little fluffy, but it's true. I mean, it's design. The first thing that when we are thinking about the design project, what we're trying to put is piece together in order to make it work, right? Not make it look fancy or edgy, right? It's more like, okay, this is working. It's like it's consistent. It makes the user to use the tool easier, right? So now I think we are very very sold on that, right? And it's not fluffy words only.
Yeah, and it sounds like an easy thing, right? We should make things simple, we should make them usable, but that's actually very hard to achieve, right, in an eloquent way. Can you talk a little bit about your process, right, of wireframes and being low-tech and how you flesh out the specifics of a project?
I would like to add this story behind this. Traditionally, software was built by engineers from the first day to the last one, right? So what design is doing now from Airbnb, Google, and all these companies that are trying to change the way, it's like trying to understand what we're building, right, before putting any line of code. So because of that, we start with lo-fi requirements and think about the pieces that are part of the product, right? So,
and for those listening who may not know the terminology, I actually don't even totally know the terminology. What's lo-fi?
Okay,
Lucia?
so it's like getting all your ideas in images, but not images, lo-fi images.
Okay.
Like, for example, some
Sketches
components. Yes,
or-
sketches. So you have all the components that you're going to need and that are not going to be beautiful yet and everything. It's going to be just the essential. So the client or the people that are going to use that understand what they are going to use. I'm sorry, that was really bad.
No, but we use it for testing too, right? Like at the end, it's an early version of the screens. We are not paying attention to fonts, colors, or anything like that. It's more like, okay, this makes sense, like the navigation, how the layout is put here in this flow. And we test with users, and we also test with partners and clients in order to make them feel if it's something that is close to what they have in mind, right? So it's an early state that actually we have like some engineers also joining that process, because it's not only a design thing, it's more a product thing actually, right?
Yeah,
it's about defining the functionality of the product that you're designing. So when we say lo-fi, it's about to avoid the visual or the aesthetical part of the website. So those decisions cannot condition functionality.
Exactly.
So
yeah, because before you do the wireframes, you have a list of all the functionalities you have to have in a website or in a product, digital product. So with wireframing, what you do is putting those functionalities together and in a way that they work. So in this page, in this screen, we are going to have this functionality and this other one because they are related, and we think that the user are going to find it useful to have them together. So it's like situation.
It's a start in the conversation, because for me it's like, okay, if you have a requirement, it's like okay, how traditional we did it in the software is like the user can search. It's like, what does it mean, right? An engineer, if you take like 10 engineers and use that term, that sentence, they can build like 50 different products from there, right? So it's more like, okay, we have that statement. How it should look. Is this a mobile app? Is this a product, platform, a marketplace? Okay, who is our user? Is old, is young? So at the end, it's a way of, okay, let's talk about the functionality, but let's put it in a screen, in a lo-fi, and trying to understand also, because it's something that we have been doing here, right? It's like, in the way you're putting the pieces together, you're also analyzing the product, you're shaping the product,
when you're talking about it,
Exactly.
right? Some of the conversations that sparks, right? When I think of our past couple of days together, and just actually on that note, we've been working on some really cool stuff that we're excited to share with those listening soon. But we were having conversations, and we're writing things on the whiteboards and on sticky notes and moving things around, which, as we've seen, works so well in person. And you do a lot of work remotely. How do you bring that tactile, in-person conversations? How do you replicate that in a remote environment?
Well, we try to do as smooth as possible, right? I mean, for sure it's not the same working in the same place than remote, but I think it's a matter of communication level, like some tools like InVision or Miro or other tools that are trying to replicate what we do in person, but in a digital product. And then it's also a matter of trying to understand the other part, right? Like, it's also that we need to, from our clients and partners, like trying to understand how do we perceive the product, and us like trying to understand their goals, because I think that's the big thing here. Anyway, I feel that yeah, a whiteboard is a good exercise, and it's super nice, and also it has been very nice to have you here a couple of days working together. But I also think that some work can be done for each member in isolation, like trying to think, then putting together in a remote way, and trying to be very communicative. Because I think the downside of this kind of session is that sometimes a lot of information is spread around the room, right? And it's not very well documented. So everything has up and downs.
Yep. And actually, on the idea of audience, right, you talk about with your clients and interacting with them in ways that help you build a robust picture of what they're looking for. This is one of those spaces that's very similar to in data visualization, right? You're designing a graph for somebody to eventually do something with. So I'm curious in your process of how do you ensure you're on the same page and that you understand your audience's needs, right? How do you design with your audience or your user in mind?
Well, there are different phases. For example, at first you have to talk with the client what the client thinks it's going to be the product.
Like what they think.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you have to make some with the wireframes and everything. You have to test the users, and you ask the user what they need and do a user journey.
So let me just step back and restate. So this is great, Lucia. So you talk to your client, and then you sort of refine or put words around what they need, build that in a low a rough way, let's say, and then you test that with users.
Yes.
Exactly.
And what sort of feedback do you get from users that help you understand if that's the right direction or if you might want to change course?
Well, for example, there are two different kind of situations. The first one is that when you give a task to the user and they have to do it, and depending on how hard the task was for them, and we have succeed or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is that you just show the product to the user, and you start asking them, what are you looking at? What do you think this button is going to take you?
Yep.
Yeah.
What do you think this car is going to be? And those kind of things. So you have
and so
feedback.
are you literally sitting one-on-one with users to do that, or how are you collecting that feedback?
Oh, well, it depends, because that one is with the low file wireframes, but maybe we can have, before that, we can have a test with some
research,
and some research with a question and answers that they can type, or maybe they can choose from.
It depends also in the product. I mean, sometimes there is an end end user product and consumer product, that the test could be with almost anyone, right? If you're trying to launch a new Instagram, it's like, okay, I want to approach you, anyone, right? But sometimes
So people who may not have any context, right, about what it is.
and you test that.
Yep.
Sometimes it's very well, I mean, you have a focus on, well, I don't know, this is a marketplace for truck drivers and I don't know, like something like that. So let's find some truck drivers. And like, let's see, actually, if you take the research part in like a big part of the project, the first thing that you should do is like observe, for example, like, okay, how do they do the task today without the product? And trying to take insights from them, from that situation and digitalize in some way, right? So, yeah, it's a process of, at the end is researching, like benchmarking with other products in the market, recognizing patterns, I think, because users are used to use like some patterns in other products. So this is a mix of intuition, empiric process, I think, testing, and finally iterating. I mean, at the end it's like a scientific method, like iterating a lot and mistake.
Something interesting, I think, is that normally the experts say that you shouldn't have more than 8 users to test.
Okay.
Having a test, because in 8 users you can have everything that is going to be in all the users.
Oh, interesting.
So
if you're smart about how you choose the 8?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
You don't have to have 100 users testing your wireframes, only 8, and you are going to have some quality answers.
It also depends the size of the project.
Yeah, of
Finally,
course.
the research team at Twitter is not the same as the research that we can do, right?
But yeah, of course. But I mean, for a project that we can work
5
on,
to 10,
maybe, and for each iteration, I mean, you don't need to have the whole company doing a test.
Yep.
You just have to choose randomly, or maybe not randomly, because if the iteration is going, that part of the project is going to be for this kind of role, you have to test that role.
And there is a test after you launch the product too.
Yeah.
I mean, when you launch the product, you have to set up some tools for analytics,
You're
metrics,
collecting data and iterating from there.
At the end is like testing with users. They are actually actively using the product, and you can see what's happening, why they don't click in the button, why they don't perform the action properly, and things like that.
Yeah. And then iterating from there, I imagine, right?
Yes.
Going back to the client, because you talked about, we have these initial conversations, we figure out what they think they want. Do you ever have clients that come to you and they don't know exactly, or they don't know exactly what they want? What do you do in that
That's our main
scenario?
skill.
That's your main skill. Okay. How do you break that down? How do you turn it into something usable?
Iterating, I think, right? Yeah. I think it's the main vision of the company. We know that there are a lot of entrepreneurs that they want to build something.
Yeah.
They don't know exactly how to do it. And actually, I have to say that when I'm doing like a sales pitching in some way, one thing that I have detected in entrepreneurs in that is that they are anxious about hiring an agency in that because they don't feel prepared to spec what they want.
Yeah. And so do they have an idea or they have a problem they want to solve?
Exactly.
Okay.
So we try to fill the gap that, okay, no problem. We will be proactive on asking what you will.
And what sort of questions do you ask to try to get at that? Juan?
I don't know, depends, but because I think one of the difficult things is sometimes the customers come with an idea and they have a business. The problem is that for us, we don't know their businesses. So we need to first understand what's the business about.
Yeah, get enough context, right, to be able to.
Because if we are creating digital products, I mean, we know how to do that, but first we need to know how that business is doing.
And then is it a matter of fitting what you're creating into that business or understanding the relative priorities of your client?
Yeah, we try to make them think about the product, not only making decisions. We can be more opinionated on some specific patterns, like, oh, that's an anti-pattern, or that interaction doesn't make sense. But regarding the business thing, it's more like a matter of throwing questions.
Open questions.
And trying to feel like, okay, but are you sure that, it's like, okay, where are you more focused on the suppliers, on the end user? And depending on that, we can make decisions. But at the end, you are the one understanding that. And also, we always see like a a big part of the success on any project and how focused is that part, right? The other part, the client, the partner. If they are super focused on the product, we can build the rest. But we need them to be like super focused on what's really needed.
So if you can't get their attention, then that's a harder
because
thing to make
there
work.
And probably that's another question, but sometimes we have a problem that some entrepreneurs want to build a lot of features, a lot of parts of the product, and it's usually the opposite who drives to success.
I think that's the most common scenario, that people want to create like a super complex tool, and it's difficult. The oversizing of the project is so common that's why it's important to have like an MVP, like a minimum viable project.
And also some context of what's technology, right? Because it's very common to have like guidance like, well, look at Airbnb's is doing this, or look at Uber does this. It's like, well, we can talk about the fonts they use to do that, right? So it's a matter of, okay, where are we now? What do we want to achieve? And we are the experts to say, okay, you need this part of design, this part of engineering, and that.
So for those who may not be familiar, can you talk about, Juan, you mentioned MVP, right? What is a minimum viable product? How do you define that, or how would you define that to someone not familiar?
I think it would be the product that you design and develop for creating the minimum infrastructure that you need to start the business. So there are lots of functionalities that could be interesting for the user, but they are out of the business. And so, for example, as we were talking about Airbnb, I think the main goal for everyone is going to Airbnb is to look for an apartment, to visit another city. And they can offer you experiences around the city and other tours and things like that. But that's not on the main goal.
As we saw, those were things that got added later, right, over time.
Exactly. So I think it's better to focus first on the first needs, and then we can move to extra services.
And this makes total sense, but I can totally imagine the scenario that you must encounter all the time, where you go into a client, you're talking about, let's simplify, let's get it down to the MVP. But your client wants the world, right? They want all the functionality and they want everything. How does that conversation go? How do you both help them identify what the minimum thing is that they need to put out there, but then also get them comfortable that that's a good thing to do?
It's difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult. Well, we usually run an exercise about, needs, requirements, nice to have, right? And trying to categorize from there, right? We try to launch our own products sometimes, and we have a story around a AR game we launched for kids that is based on, there's a small dragon, so it's a AR game that it's played by two kids. So one is hiding the dragon and pass the iPhone to the other guy, the other kid, and the kid is trying to catch it, right?
Okay.
I remember when we created the MVP and I was testing it with my son, that they were more excited about hiding the dragon than finding the dragon.
Okay.
And that's a super interesting insight, because you have that intuition of, a game of hiding the dragon and finding that, but I think that 90% of us were like, the good thing is to find the dragon, right? And then as soon as you try the product with real people, you see that they're feeling the product in a different way, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of startups start with, let's think about any specific way, but at the end they have a value proposition that they want to validate. And the important thing on the MVP is to create the minimum product that looks trustworthy. It has to be well designed to people trust in the product, that this is scalable and that, but at the end is trying to provide you that functionality and see if users say, yeah, this is what I want.
And the reason to do that, just to reframe, would be because, using your scenario, once you figure out that no, actually people like hiding the dragon better than trying to catch it, that may change where you go next then, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So at the end, what we want to do is convince the client that first you have to have the bike instead of the car, so you can start moving. But you are going in the right direction. And when you start moving, you will be able to do more things, like something like that. It's like a silly example, but
it's very common.
But I think
the scooter, bike, and car.
And then the car.
How do you, so as you're thinking through this, right? So you've made the bike now. You've figured out what the MVP is with a client. You've tested it with users. You've iterated. How do you avoid forming attachment to what you've done so that if the direction needs to change because of some of this user feedback that you're getting, that you are okay with that? Because I think that's something that's hard, right? When you take time creating something and you've partnered with a client and then you have to go in another direction.
Yeah, well, actually, that's one of the I would say that is one of the downsides of our role in the project, because we try to be proactive, opinionated on things, but at the end we understand that it's not our company, right? And sometimes we see directions like, well, yeah, let's see. I mean, we probably do something different, but at the end, I think that having a huge attachment to a specific direction is one of the main threats for a startup. Because if you are not listening to your users and seeing what they really expect, you can feel that you're a visionary and you have your idea. And I know that this will be like that. I mean, things like Twitter, Instagram, those are like 1 in 1 billion, right? At the end, a lot of startups are just like saying, okay, why don't we do a digital process for this in real life? And it's a super straightforward process, right? So yeah, we as a team, we are trying to be like that. So it's also part of our empathy, right? Like, well, we know that we are until here, until this line, we are proposing things, but at the end, it's your company, so you make the decisions.
And
right?
there's I think the opposite thing is also difficult, because is if the needs change, or if you are tied to an idea and you need to change that, you also need to be motivated to develop one thing that is not in your mind. So I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but you develop or design an idea and you're attached with that.
Yeah.
But then some contradictions come, or the client is not super satisfied with that, and you need to change that. Yeah. You still need to be attached with the new idea. You cannot be
that you have
passive.
to sort of get on board with something new. Yeah, because that's another thing, right? I guess, when do you give in to that, right? When do you try to push a client in another direction because you think it's the right direction to go? And when do you let go of that attachment and cater to their needs? Or I guess it always has to be a balance, I suppose.
Yeah, well, as an agency, in some way we can, or as a studio, I like studio more. We can always relate to timeline, effort, budget, right? And at the end, it's a way of saying like, oh, we budgeted this for 200 hours, and if you are taking this direction, probably it will be 500. Are you committed with that?
So you have constraints that you can come back to.
Exactly. So that's our power, as a power weapon for conversations sometimes, because at the end, well, it's a matter of understanding that technology is expensive, and if you make bad decisions, you can be throwing money, right? So that's part of the process too. Like and that's something that I will always try to tell to our partners too, is like, fortunately we are successful right now. We don't need to sell hours. So there are a lot of times that we are the ones saying like, let's stop and not build this part until we're sure. We don't need this, I don't know, like whatever $1,000. Let's stop, because I really want you to be successful, because at the end I will be more successful too, right? So
What about, so we've talked about if the client changes directions and how hard that can be when you form attachment, and then Juan, you mentioned needing to form attachment then to the new direction. But what about, because I imagine along the way you're forming that sort of pride in work even before that, right? Where you and the client may be totally aligned and you think you're building the perfect solution, but then you get feedback from the users that that's not the case. How do you take that feedback? How do you take that critique and do productive things with it? Because I feel like, and this is me looking in from the outside, not trained in design, but I feel like when people come from a design background or they've spent a lot of time there, that the critique process is something that's built in and it's expected, and feelings are taken out of it, which may not be the case. How do you stay open to feedback and iterating?
It's difficult to...
It's personality at the end and mindset of the company. Because as you said, it's more common in design environment, even though you have to be ready for that. I mean, like sometimes designers are like proposing something and they love what they're proposing, and then you receive negative feedback, right? And that's the same as launching a product and receiving negative feedback for users. It's like something you love and you see like how people is like not I mean, giving any value to what you build, right? So at the end it's something that is part of our work, right?
I think at the first time it's common to have a more emotional response to that. But if you sleep with that idea, sometimes it becomes more rational. You try to understand. But so there's a mix of feelings. At the beginning, it's more emotional, it's more passionate. But then you need to understand that you weren't right.
If you were coaching someone to be more open to critique, because so this is an area in data visualization that is hugely important, right? Getting feedback and iterating and understanding how people are perceiving and using your designs. And often the design's created in a vacuum and then it's put out in a graph and people hope that something good happens with it. And so figuring out ways to instill more critique and iteration and feedback during that process could be a really powerful thing. But how do you coach someone who's getting that sort of feedback maybe for the first time?
Well, that they have to learn.
Yeah,
Of course.
Well, it's a two-side process because in some way you have also to teach the client and the partner, to provide valuable feedback. And I think that's important here because it's not the same to receive feedback as it's very common. It's one of our jokes, right? Like, I like that blue, but I don't love it, right? It's like, what can I do with that?
Yep.
That's pretty different to say like, I'm not sure that the call to action is to sell the book or to, I don't know, like join a community, right? I mean, at the end, that's a different conversation and we can use some data to that, right? So trying to be less subjective in some things for the feedback, both the client in order to provide a good value feedback and also the designer to not have like emotions on how receiving the feedback.
Yep.
I think it's important.
And asking these questions, right, that if you're not getting the right sort of feedback, I imagine that drill into that so that you are able to get the right sort of feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
Juan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think sometimes in the tech industry, there's a feeling that we are like in the coolest industry, and we think that we know everything. We are in the top of the wave.
Some ego, you might say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we need to understand that there are people that have other businesses and they know a lot about their businesses.
Yeah.
And you need to learn from them because probably they are very successful and they are introducing or they're getting their business into technology. It doesn't mean that they are like illiterate people or something like that. It's just you need to learn from
well, it's coming back to this idea of context and right empathy that you talked about earlier, Hector.
Yeah, and also iteration too, because something we are doing for the risk in some products and the process of building them is like trying to throw material to the client rapidly, because sometimes for us it's nearly impossible to understand 100% of their business, right? But as soon as we are putting some screens together, the conversation around that is more solid than when we're still with paper and notes.
Because they have something to react to.
Exactly. It's like, oh, no, I don't like this navigation. We weren't talking about it. It's like, oh, what do we talk about it? And then you have a conversation about it, right? It's not about the idea, right? So at the end, it's a way of having a mood of, and also that's something I wanted to add. I mean, we have attachment to everything we do because we see it like growing from the early days and that, but for sure, I mean, it's impossible to have the same attachment that the own person that is owning that company has for his baby, right? And sometimes we have to find that limit and say, okay, I won't say this because this is his product and I will respect that, right?
So you work with a lot of different companies and have over time. Are you seeing things change? Are there trends or are there sort of underlying commonalities that are staying the same over time? What do you think across the different sort of clients and products that you're dealing with?
Well, we think there are, even if we don't realize it. Because, for example, the other day I was talking with my colleague and he said something like, oh, that's 2017. and it was true. Okay. So we don't really realize it. Well, of course, we are informed about the new trending things and everything, but it happens even if we don't want it.
And sometimes I have to say that we take some advantage of it, right? Because some clients say like, I want the product to feel edgy or modern or wherever, like some fluffy words, and we say like, well, I think I know what are you expecting, right? Because there are some specific websites or products that are like top right now, like Framer Framer website. Yeah, Framer for technology website, marketing website, Airbnb for marketplace, or Uber for app, right? So at the end, every time that they're referencing something like that, it's like, okay, I know which patterns I can use in that. Because
and what are some of those things today? I mean, I'm curious, Lucia, also, what made it look 2017?
It was a website. I don't really remember the
like
name of it.
Typographies.
Yeah, it was like the components, the way they use the gradients and everything. It was like, I don't know how to explain it. Well, I could if we did a really good workshop about that. But the thing is that you notice that, and there are some components and some colors, some typographies that are really trendy at some point. And when the time goes by, you can recognize how everybody was doing that at the same time.
And we see that with everything, right? I can think of, we see that with houses and the way people build homes and decorate homes, or, data visualization, you certainly see that with fonts and colors and styles. Things.
I think that it's a matter of when you see in a TV show a dinner room, right? Like in some way you are now conditioned to want the same dinner room that you don't remember where you see it, but now you want it. It's the same for websites, right? And for products, I'm seeing a trend right now in artificial intelligence, blockchain, machine learning. I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs that we are talking to right now, it's like, we this is like a normal product, but our backend is machine learning powered or blockchain powered, and that it's like, well, I see that the product is similar value to products from 5 years ago, but they now have that technology layer on top that is also good for pitch, for selling, and that. So those are also trends that sometimes we find in the market.
And what about the flip side of that? Are there underlying universal principles of design that are not going to change as the trends do? What would some of those be?
I hope so.
For sure. And I think...
What are some examples of those?
For me, if we have to decide to choose one, for me, it's simplicity. At the end, it's the main principle to follow in design. And I think, actually it was a trend with Instagram, Medium, all the Apple apps for iOS and that they make a reduction, right? And everything was white, black typography.
Minimalism.
But at the end is because everything is super complex right now that if you don't create a simple flow, the user won't be able to do anything. So I think simplicity is one of the main things that I really wanted to be focused on every product.
And there are things more specific, like for example, I don't know, the Fitts law, that it's something in design that we use in design that if you have a target, the bigger and the closer is to you, the easier is to reach it. So I mean, it's pretty obvious. But
how does that? What's a practical example where you can apply?
For example, a CTA, call to action button.
Okay.
I mean, if it's big enough, and if it's located in a position that it's easy to find, it's easier to click. Mm-hmm. But if you hide it or if you make it too small, it's difficult to reach it.
Lucia?
So all these patterns that we are using, they are like simplicity and everything that we use it, but because they work. I think we are going to continue using them until we have a different kind of device.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. When we have a different kind of device, everything is going to change. Because
meaning it's not a computer screen any longer, or it's not a phone screen
it's
any
something
longer.
different.
Think about the pull to refresh, right?
Yeah.
That's an interaction that now is super natural, but even it was Tweetbot, I think, that the guys that created that interaction, and now it's a standard for all the apps. So, but without a mobile phone with a touch screen, that's not
possible. So imagine if, I don't know, if we will have in the future, I don't know, a device that can be flexed or something like that, flexible. Yep. It's going to change all the interaction that we have with that kind of device. So design has to change to adapt.
Yeah.
But so, I think that, well, I mean, now we're facing a different era with Alexa and Google Home and that. But every time you're creating a screen, typography is, I mean, it's like creating a book. You need hierarchy, you need different levels of line heights for committing to different meanings and things like that. So at the end, we use the same skills as we use for a magazine at some point, right? But applied in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this. So simplicity, right? Fitz law, put things where they need to be and make them big enough that people can't help but do what they're meant to do. Being adaptive, right, to new technologies. This has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like we've covered so much, and we could clearly cover so much more. But in the interest of time, I want to wrap up with just one final tip from each of you. If you think of your time designing and building, what's a tip or a trick that you've realized over time that could help someone who's designing something new or wanting to, we use this at Storytelling with Data, think like a designer, right? How can someone improve their work by having the lens of design?
My tip, well, I think research. I'm not thinking about science right now. Research is important for everything, because when you only think in your intuition and come up with something, a design, illustration, a website, and that, if you don't compare to what already exists in that field, you can feel that you are the new Steve Jobs, right? Like, oh, look at my website, and then you say like, no, there are a lot of flaws here, and also it's very similar to this and this. So at the end, and that's something that we try to do here with products, is to be aware of the market, to be aware of the design trends, to be aware of technology, because being aware of the other things, you are much more sure about what you're doing, right? So I think for me it's a tip, but at the end it's applicable to life, I think, more than design. Yeah, to be aware.
Yeah, be aware. I like that. Juan?
We have talked about this before, but don't underestimate the knowledge of the customers. I think you can learn a lot from every person, and not because you're working in a fancy industry means that you're the smartest guy on earth.
Right. So value the opinion of your stakeholders and your clients and your users. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Lucia?
Well, I don't know, but only a tip, but I think we should make everything interesting. So there is no clutter. We have to focus on what the people need and what the user know really well, the users, so you can offer them what they need. I think that's and for data, for design, and for everything. So make everything interesting.
Fantastic. I think that's a great point to end on. Thank you, Hector, Lucia, Juan, for joining me here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.